So, welcome back. Hopefully you all enjoyed this short break or long break for your lunch and get some more excited for this afternoon. It's all been a great day so far. A lot of experience and added value is shared with the speakers we already had. But let's take a more deep dive this afternoon. First, we're going to start with the advanced workflows you already heard about. Maybe you're new to the platform or already a user. This session, hosted by my dear colleagues, is about the advanced workflows and integrations. Some already came up in this presentation. You heard Mercury already talk about it. You heard H and MV also talk about it. I want to welcome to my stage my very dear and valuable colleagues. Yeah, I really have to say it. It's Kenneth from NTI Denmark and David from NTI Ireland. Take it away, guys.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Hope everybody can hear me now. Thanks a lot for joining this afternoon's first session about advanced workflows and integrations with Autodesk Forma. Some of you might be familiar with a picture like this. I've looked like this a couple of times in my past jobs, not in NTI, obviously. But this is what it's all about when working with integrations internally, and you hear somebody saying, we can do this on our own. And then you might look like the guy on the left here. Anyways, let's see. I just need to switch the screen here. There we go. So, as Colin already mentioned, I have my dear colleague with me today. Dave, could you say a couple of words about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Kenneth. Hi, I'm David Purdon. I'm the Technical Director at NTI Ireland UK. And I'll be following on Kenneth talking about some of these advanced workflows, what the business cases have been, and what the benefit and impact has been to businesses who have done this. Over to you, Kenneth.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm Kenneth, Head of AC Cloud and Infrastructure in NTI Denmark. Been here for ages, not as long as Dave, though. I will be talking about the intro to this topic, specifically how we approach this part with integrations and advanced workflows in our own IPs as well inside NTI, and how we can support customers in that direction and why we are doing it. Practical stuff, you're all muted. You can ask questions in the, not the chat, the Q&A, that is, might be at the bottom or the top of the screen, or you can ask questions at the end of the session. You're also more than welcome to contact us directly after the session, and we will provide the contact info if requested. So, I guess this is what it's all about, and I have to change one thing here, because now it's called Autodesk Forma, not Autodesk Construction Cloud. This is a lot of third-party integrations, and all of these are connected to Autodesk Forma. End of the day, you might familiarize yourself with some of these integrations. We have Office 365 at the top, alongside with Power BI. You can connect to Gmail. We have Leica Geosystems doing stuff with their point clouds. You can connect to ERP systems, Business Central, and so forth. So there are no limitations. I should hesitate to say that, but almost no limitations if you have an open platform you can connect to. It's all about open APIs, and that's what Autodesk Forma is built upon. So one other thing that I'm quite sure Dave will touch upon this topic as well is obviously AI. We work a lot with Autodesk AI specifically because of our partnership with them about analysis, automation, integrations. A lot of you will know these instead: ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, Gemini, and Mistral AI. And this is something that we see being connected to all the solutions continuously the last couple of years. Especially now, we do see that this is getting to be concrete instead of some fluffy stuff that we have just talked about a lot. What happens when we talk about integrations and advanced workflows and AI and how to integrate all of this? Typically, when we talk to many of our customers out there, this is the mindset suddenly that you see out there. How do we actually connect the dots? What should be connected? What is the structure behind it? And suddenly it's all of a chaos inside your organization, and you have no clue what to do. A more low-key approach to that could also be this picture. You have Office 365 documents, you have PDFs, calendars, you have different storage locations and different ways of communicating with each other. And all of this can be structured with new technology in a way that makes it much more efficient to work in an organization in general. So when listening to a topic like advanced workflows and integrations with Autodesk Forma, I would say that headliner could scream complexity. But what is it actually about? What do we actually want to achieve with this? I think that's the key to it. So working with advanced workflows integration is about simplifying your everyday routines. It's about automating time-consuming tasks. So basically take manual work that's really time-consuming and automate that so you can actually do what makes more purpose in your daily life and what brings more value to your organization in general. It's about enabling better analysis across platforms, so not only Forma, but also connecting that to other platforms and see what is the status of my business, of what we are doing as we speak. And it's about a term that we have been using for quite a long time, removing silos. I would more say it's about connecting silos, because data will always be positioned in different storage locations, whether that's the cloud or an internal server or whatever it is. We need to connect it the right way instead. So it's all about connecting data in general. So in NTI, we have talked a lot about this approach to integration, to new technologies, to digital transformation, and we have helped a lot of customers connecting different solutions over time, both on a strategic level, but also on a more low practical level. We do invest heavily in new tech competencies, and that's through people hiring and new technology. Simply because the technology development is so rapid as it is, you need to have new competencies inside your company. What we do is we try to encourage everyone to be curious and innovative and to share ideas internally, but we want to do it in a controlled and secure way, which is also what we would do if we help you in your projects and with your cases that you want to develop inside your own company. This kind of mindset is also what we work with our own IPs. I have an example here that I want to deep dive into. So these are 4 different platforms. One of them is Autodesk Forma. And then we have 3 other platforms, which is our own IPs. So we have our NTI FM, which is a facility management solution. We have NTI Bidco, which is for tender. We have project management. That is a top-on module to facility management, basically targeted towards project managers in general. What is really key here, and what is also key to a lot of the other products that we develop, like NTI for Revit, a plugin to Revit, real-time LCA for sustainability, NTI co-manage, and so forth. I could keep on going with that, is that we want to make it all connected. We want to be able to connect the dots, not just in between our own solutions, but also with, for instance, Autodesk Forma, ERP systems, be able to export to Power BI, work with point clouds externally, and go on and on and on and on. So if we take that example if I take it one step back here, this one is what we call NTI for operators, or NTI for building owners, depending on your specific segment. This is a typical screenshot from Forma. You can see various examples of that. What we use Forma for in this aspect is different parts, obviously, but in general for NTI for building owners, it's a drawing and BIM model archive, which competitive solutions is not very good at, but this is actually something that Forma does really well. It's a project overview, it's a project web. It's really, really strong collaboration between consultancies like architects and engineering companies and the contractors. You can do reviews, you can work with meeting minutes, punch list. One key aspect of this is working with 1-year and 5-year inspections as well for building owners and operators. And then one key that's really, really necessary to work with here is the assets part. And we have seen new APIs coming to the assets lately that really helps in this aspect. And I'll explain more about that in the next one here. This is our NTI FM solution, and it could be any facility management solution. The key is that we have an open API where we can deliver data directly from the project in Autodesk Forma into the maintenance system. We have created that connection with our own NTI-FM solution here. So you have the budget for all your buildings or facilities, whatever you call that. You can do the long-term planning. You can do the task on the different buildings as well. So everything is put into place for an efficient facility management solution. We have done integrations to ERP systems. In Denmark, we have one called EG Bolig that is directly related to social housing in Denmark, but it could be anything like that. So what we do is, over time in Forma, you create a lot of data in a project, and that data can be connected to the assets in the project itself. And when we have all this data with maintenance information and so forth, we can push that directly to NTI Facility Management, and then we are able to maintain our building facility soon after the handover has been done. So this is just an efficient way that makes or automates a task that's really time consuming and manual normally, that makes it simple like this by the click of a button, more or less. We have NTI Bidco, our tender solution, as I said before. This is basically a really flexible tender solution that can be used across more or less all countries in Europe with all the tender formats that you might see out there. The cool thing about Bidco is that we have connected it to Autodesk Forma, so you can pull data or pull documents directly from Forma into a tender in NTI Bidco, and you can actually do the same with NTI FM, so you can pull data from the maintenance system directly into Bidco. So you have the direct connectivity without you needing to manually download, upload, and find out where to handle those folders with data inside it. Just push it in whenever you need it. Flexible with time schemes and all that, so really cool solution. And the last part here is our PM system, project management. It's mainly for project managers, as I said earlier. So in social housing, as if you use that as an example, project managers have a lot of projects. Some of them might be executable at one time. Some of them might just be ideas or sketches or whatever that is, but they need to have a full overview of all of them. Eventually, when one of these projects go into execution and is going to be delivered, they can push a button in project management, and they will start a project directly into Autodesk Forma. You again start developing data, information, collecting whatever you need to in the project itself. And at the end of the day, then you can push the assets directly into the facility management solution again. So try to combine this as a lifecycle project management kind of thing, where data is connected all the way through from construction to maintenance, renovation, and also at the end of the day, demolishing the building itself, which demands a lot of documentation as well. So whether we talk about Forma, ERP systems, SharePoint solutions, Power BI, or our own solutions, we try to connect all those dots. I could talk as well about MDoc that you can see on the right top corner. That's our document management solution, also connected directly into Autodesk Forma, so you can push documents from your internal document management system directly into the projects, and then you have the connectivity again all over. So this is what we try to achieve. And I know this is also something that Dave will talk more into in a few seconds. So Dave, let's get some real life examples about integration, optimization, and automation as well. I know you have a lot of info that we need to hear now. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Kenneth. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to continue on the discussion that Kenneth has started in this session to talk about a couple of different things. We've spoken a little bit about integration between different systems, Forma, SharePoint. We've also talked about the NTI portfolio of tools that we have generated to, extend and enhance those functionalities for businesses across the portfolio of clients that we deal with. What I'm going to talk about specifically is a couple of things. One is what determines something should be automated or integrated. How do you approach that as a business? And to look at 3 examples of where we've done this with clients previously, and really focus on not so much the technicality of what we put in place. I will cover that, but more importantly, to talk about what the business impact of that is. Because what we're really aiming for here is optimization. By harmonizing your business systems, with your project delivery systems of choice, and then subsequently with the choices of other tools that other people use that you have to collaborate with. So as I mentioned briefly, I'm David Purdon, I'm a technical director, 30 years as a technologist, implementing technology across design and construction, certified in BIM practitioner, PMP, a technical consultant for 26 of those years. My areas of focus as a consultant are around business transformation, digitization, and recently platform integration. The main thing for me is that I'm a massive technologist. So I love tech. My whole house is teched out to the God knows what else. Huge gamer, and overall, I'm generally a tech head. So if it's something has connected to the cloud or has buttons on it, I pretty much have at least one copy of it somewhere. But the last 5 years, my role has evolved into looking at automation and integration, and particularly around building solutions that essentially harmonize platforms, process, and outcomes. So as a business, we have transformed into an outcome services company. We work with clients to determine what outcomes they're trying to achieve. We look at their platforms, we look at the solutions and technology that we provide, and we look to harmonize them to deliver the outcomes you're trying to achieve as a business. So when we look at integration and optimization, and in this case, automation, what are we doing? Well, we're trying to shift a traditional methodology of a singular area where all information is stored into an intelligent set of tools that have information across at different stages of life cycle. And that different stages of life cycle can incorporate things like your internal domain storage areas like file servers or SharePoint. It can also include tools like Forma, where you have a collaboration platform for third parties, but it also then has to incorporate your contractual and obligations to projects that you're invited to. So how do you harness all of these different tools together while creating at the top, which is an informed business that understands where you are at any given time, and the ability to inform and standardize your approaches. So as an industry, we've been looking at how do we harmonize data? Well, to do that, you have to understand what the problem is. And the problem is pretty simple. What you're trying to do as a business, every other business is trying to do the same way. You're trying to standardize on your technology stack and your preferred way of working while maintaining the ability and the agility to meet the contractual obligations that you have to deliver as part of a wider project team. The challenge with that is we're not all using the same systems. We then create situations where information has to be duplicated across systems to keep it in sync. It creates an inconsistency in reporting because different systems host information in different ways, and they might have metadata or values that are stored in a different function. And you may have some information late points because you can't natively push the information in a secure and a discrete way. So you get these pockets, or as Kenneth mentioned earlier, silos appearing. So what we try to do, or what we're trying to do as an industry with automation, is to move away from that. So from an automation integration standpoint, there's essentially 5 or 6 elements that you're trying to function. You're trying to create an event or a trigger that starts an automated process. You're then using that trigger to extract information in some capacity. You then have to transform that information in some cases into a format that makes logical sense for the target that you're aiming for. That information has to be validated, published to its target, and reported back as complete. And that normally falls into 4 main areas for most clients. Document changes trigger an automation. A standardized process that you're doing in your system completes and there's a status change in that content. That will then create a trigger. So a typical example would be the approval of a document in one system triggers a transfer to that of that information to another. Information release and exchange. So you might have contractual obligation to deliver information on certain scheduled phases. So that schedule now becomes the determining factor when you release that information to a project. And then laterally, the ability to synchronize and harmonize activity tracking across systems. So typical examples would be managing tasks across systems, issues, checklists, forms, for example. So By creating a harmonized event, if you raise a task in one environment, it creates an equivalent on the other, and it shares the value of data between the two. So if you change the value in one, it updates the other, and vice versa. The idea behind that is to allow people to work in the environment that they're most comfortable with. So how does that work from an automation standpoint and an integration standpoint? So you've heard mentioned earlier that clients have been looking at integration between business systems and project delivery platforms, in this case, Forma. Those business systems could range to ERP systems, SharePoint, OneDrive, whatever it is. It's an internal system. For most clients that have looked at automation, there are kind of three main components. There is a source of truth of information where you are generating information on a constant basis. There is a target in which you want to synchronize or publish that information to. And then in between is the part where we are mostly contracting and consulting with clients on, which is the automation technology layer. So you have a platform that essentially acts as a broker between your systems. That broker defines certain logic that determines where information goes from one place to another, or if it comes back. And those things can relate to triggers, process logic, specific business outcomes or deliverable outcomes based on contractual obligations. And then below that, you have the platforms that we normally provide or work with clients on to provide automation. Our own proprietary automation platform called NTI Integrator, which we recently just built a Forma connector for. So from that perspective, we've also got ACC Connect, which is a cloud-based platform, which is a relationship between Autodesk and Workato, which allows you to generate your own automation workflows between different systems. And from more a business-centric approach, where we find Power Automate coming into play is where you want to automate things internally before proceeding to push them externally. So automation generally is functionally provided across either one or a couple of these things that are leading into each other. And where they normally relate to is files and folder transfer or synchronization, the transfer of issues and tasks either completed or in harmony to update data between the two, the definition and the extraction and publishing of metadata between instances of files across different systems, and the ability to create event-based triggers based on a process or a workflow that you're concluding in one platform that leads into a process initialization in another platform. So what does that look like in raw terms? Well, depending on the platform, you define an automation workflow. So on the left, we have an example of a workflow that we have built out that essentially does one of the questions that was asked earlier. How do I transfer data from SharePoint to ACC or Forma, as it's called now? Well, the recipe or the automation workflow on the left, depending on your platform, specifies the inputs and outputs for each step that the automation has to do. And as a user of the systems, your responsibility is to plug in the inputs and outputs. And those inputs can be standard rules, like you're going to this folder and you're collecting this. You're going to this location and you're going to put it there. Or it can be variables, things that vary from project to project or things that vary from source and target. So the name of the file can vary. The path in the project can vary. And whether or not it's a folder or a file can vary, which in this case is an item. So the automation workflow sets out the rules, sets out the steps, and then defines the outcome that you're going to achieve in your automation. That defined outcome then becomes an output in your target environment. So on the right there, we just have a very simple window of files starting to land in a Forma project that originally started in a SharePoint instance. Okay. So where that kind of comes into its own is the workflow allows you to set three main things broken down into 5 or 6 elements. It allows you to set up a secure relationship between your source and your target systems. It allows you to create an integrated workflow between your source and target systems. It defines the APIs, the programming interfaces between your technology that determines what you're sending and what you're receiving and how it's structured. You then define the data payload. So if it's a file, you're determining the file content, the file type, its location. You're setting those details out as a rule or as a variable. You're defining how that will land in the system. And you're also incorporating things like scalability and traceability. So on the right there, we have a very simple video here that's highlighting our NTI integrator automation platform. And what this video is showing is the ability to build a configuration that sets up a transaction. And a transaction is essentially a job that's connected to a workflow. So a single instance of an automation. In here, we're able to define our clients, whether it's SharePoint, whether it's ACC Forma, whether it's Business Central, or any other platform that has an API. What we're setting up here, and I'll just pause it for a moment, is we're building the secure relationship between the systems. Once that secure relationship is defined by you as a developer, or for us as a consultant developer, let's go back one step, we're then able to effectively build that automation. So in the example here, I have an ACC folder with no content in it. Once I run the workflow, which is in our integrator system, it's going to collect the source folder, and it's going to grab all the folders and all their content, and it's going to recreate that in the new folder here. So as we go through that process, we then pick our target and we start our transaction. Now, for our system, transactions are quite important because it does allow us two things. It allows us to track automations over time. It allows us to track the outcomes of automations and how the integration is working between the different systems. And then, as an outcome, we can then collect those outcomes. So we can collect that the files have landed in the correct target. If there are any issues, we can create feedback loops that says we couldn't process this file because it has a weird character in it, or there's something wrong with the file's content in one way or another. But it allows us to do mass translation of information across multiple systems without too much of any human intervention. The only intervention a person has to do is to start the transaction, pick a start, pick a target, and let the thing run in between. So where the benefit to a business comes from in this is if that's something that you have to repetitively do constantly, daily, weekly, monthly, not just one person, but multiple people, and not just one project, but multiple projects, you're now looking at building in economies of scale in terms of efficiency and time saved as a business. So now that we understand the general methods of how automation are generally applied, I could talk about the technicality in more detail and talk about the different functions and workflows that we can put in place. But those functions and workflows are extensible. The only limitations you have is deciding on a platform that you want to run your automations from. The second thing is making sure you have a defined process that has points that can be automated, platforms that can be integrated against, and then more importantly, a business case that warrants putting the automation in the first place. So over the next couple of slides, instead of getting into the real nuts and bolts and the grind of it, I think it's important to stress why you should do this as a business, more so than how you can do it. That's our job as a technology partner with you. So I'm going to look at 3 specific use cases that we have rolled out that are live and are being used extensively by clients that we deal with. Now, I'm not going to go into the clients themselves, and I may be a bit light on certain details, but the reality is I'm going to look at 3 specific areas: the business case, the solution, and the business outcome, and what was achieved by automating and integrating these systems. So the 3 use cases I'm going to look at is a information release automation between a central library of pre-approved and validated documents that have to be distributed to multiple projects that can be stored on any system. Could be Forma, could be SharePoint, could be any other CD. The second one is what we would classify as a one and done. A client has a major bottleneck problem in terms of data transformation and wants to specify moving to another platform. The challenge is the sheer amount of data and functional changes that need to happen to that data to land on, in this case, Forma. The third one is more about a business optimization. Part of a business wanted to streamline and standardize their commissioning and asset management system that they were running off Forma, but wanted to remove the repetitive, tedious tasks that were constantly happening on projects and removing a big area of human error. And the human error related to not building the asset register correctly, not assigning the correct checklist to each individual asset, and then more importantly, not collecting the completed information so they could collect it as part of their commissioning lifecycle process. The goal of that was then to be able to have a completed area in the files area that they could transfer everything over to their client's environment as job complete. Underneath all of that is the feasibility of the automation. And that falls into two specific areas. You need to understand the business case inside and out. So the business case for case A was that they had a central information system that stored all their project information for their main turnkey infrastructure. So they build a solution that can be tailored and purpose-built geographically anywhere in the world. But it needs specific changes to that on a per project basis. So their library of how a person could build their infrastructure is centrally stored, and it's then distributed to different projects where it goes through a standard information lifecycle. The challenge with that is that they wanted to do two very specific things. They wanted to control how and when the information was released to these projects, and they wanted to make sure there was a consistency and metadata between their library and the projects that the information would land in. The second thing is that security and traceability became an important part. So they wanted to be able to automatically, via automation, watermark any information digitally that was going to a project out of their central library. So our first challenge was to identify what parts of the process influenced or dictated the rest. Once we identified that, we realized that the information delivery platform, the package management platform for all the documents that they would release as work packages, was the main area that we would use to push everything out through the systems. So as a solution, what we ended up providing was consultancy in rejigging their information delivery planning system to incorporate smaller independent project delivery plans. And in those plans were a breakdown of documents and work packages that contained those documents. In those delivery plans, we then scaled out all the metadata requirements that would be needed internally and on the projects that they were going to be hosted on, in this case, Forma. Then we worked with them to build out an automation platform that sat in between. In this particular instance, it was ACC Connect, but it could have been Integrator, it could have been any other tool that we use for automation. That platform controlled 5 or 6 different things. It was waiting from a trigger from each of the independent delivery plans for each project to send a signal from the package. So the way that worked is that a person would go into the project IDP, they would select a package and they would say release to project 1. That would be the signal for the automation to now go into the library, scan all the files, collect all the files that are contained in that package, and then pick them up from the Forma library, which is their central library where they all host their information. Then we had the security and traceability automation. So for each file that we collected, we pushed that into a watermarking platform. And it would put a digital stamp on it, it would put a digital signature in it, and it would put a watermark somewhere in the file, whether it's a PDF, a Revit file, or a CAD file. That automation then would then send a signal to the upload automation and say, this is the file going in, that's the file going out. These are all the pieces of metadata you need that are coming from the library. You now need to publish that into the correct location in project 1, and you need to populate all the metadata that's in the IDP. The file would land in the project in its right location. It would populate with all the metadata from the delivery plan, and then it would do one extra step. It would then go and collect the unique identifier of the file in Forma, and it would go back to the project IDP, and it would add that in as a link to the delivery plan. So if someone was looking at that delivery plan and wanted to look at the file, they would click on the link, and it would take them to Forma and bring them straight to the project. So on the surface, few bits of complexity there, but it's a streamlined process. The only thing that a person has to do now is update a package to say release the project, not have to manually download things, no data entry. So once the solution's in place and we've worked it through one scenario, we now had enough information to determine the impact on that business. Over a period of time, we transferred over 135,000 files between the library to multiple projects. We were able to then synchronize the metadata and standardize the specific information between the project and the library. There was no manual handling between the information delivery plan, the library, or the watermarking system, and the people were only releasing it based on approval. What that meant as an impact when we measured what we were replacing in terms of tedious repetitive tasks is that over a yearly period, they saved over 1,400 hours of tedious downloading and uploading across different systems. They saved 250 hours per year in manual data entry between their metadata files in the Forma and the updated records in their IDPs. And it also saved 100 hours of having to track the progress of things so they could report them, as well as finding misplaced files and wrong entries due to human error. So on average, every time they roll this out against a new project, they are saving 300 plus hours per project from this point going forward. So as a return in time and effort, it took about 80 to 100 hours to put the solution in place. Every time they roll that out, they're saving 300 hours plus, depending on the complexity of the project. So that automation alone has now paid for itself 10 to 15 times over, just in this one instance of an automation that the client needed. Scenario 2 is a little bit more straightforward. So I won't spend too much time on this one, but the reality of it is we were approached by a client who wanted to move 250 projects off of SharePoint and move them to an equivalent project on Autodesk Forma. Each project had somewhere between 2 and 10 gigabytes of data, and the total amount was well in excess of 5 terabytes in size. It was nearer 10 by the time we went through the whole lot of versioning. There was an additional caveat to this, is that they had to restructure the folders to match ISO 19650 standards. So it required a pre-processing step to change folders, change locations, and change structure prior to putting it into Forma. And the only restrictions we had were it had to be done in phases based on an impact and priority, and the users had to be switched on when the project had been confirmed as live. So we identified the SharePoint area. We identified a need for an automation to sit between this due to the sheer size. We identified an automation requirement to build out the projects based on the project names in the SharePoint environment. And then we had to use the automation to broker when these projects would be published. What we put in place was a twofold automation. Stage 1 was to use Power Automate and a landing area in SharePoint to collect the existing projects and reconfigure it into a folder structure that matched Forma's requirements. The reason for that is a business and project delivery decision. They had to change the folder structure so they could invite third parties in. So they had to change the structure so they could create discrete areas for people to see certain things, but not see everything. And that wasn't consistent with how SharePoint was created. So we used Power Automate in partnership with the client to reconfigure the projects and land them in a holding area. Then our automation platform took over. It would then see via a trigger that that project has now been completed as reconfigured via a table. That table would then be used to build out a map of folders and files. And then we would then take that, go into the Forma hub and recreate the project in the new structure, and then copy over all the files into that new structure for each individual project as we progressed. Now, pretty simplistic in its nature. Where its impact was the time it saved. So we were able to take 5 terabytes of data, systematically reorganize it, and publish the Forma on a phase-by-phase basis. We were then able to prioritize that based on the client specifications, based on the life cycle of a project, and when it was feasible to be moved. And we used a listing structure to specify that. Users were then informed via email that the projects were getting switched over, and then the project admins were able to do their QA/QC checks. What that meant for this client was when they estimated how they were going to do this manually, it was going to take 8 staff 6 months to complete, because they would have to go to each project, manually reconfigure the folders, go into Forma, create a new folder structure, copy all the content down somewhere, and manually upload it into it on a per project basis. The total effort to automate this was 344 hours. So we've gone from thousands of hours in lost potential time and effort to saving over 7,000 hours of lost effort now they can now use on something else that's more impactful for the business. The last one I'll just talk about briefly is the commissioning one. Here we wanted to standardize the asset management and commissioning system for a specialist contractor. They had a defined way of defining how their assets would go through a life cycle, how their commissioning processes would work, but they had a multitude of ways that this was being done across projects, because project leads on projects were determining how that was done, and the business wanted to standardize it. So the goal of it was to automate the generation of the asset register in Forma, the generation of needed forms against, or checklists against each of those assets, and the ability then to collect automatically all the completed forms into an asset folder in the file data management layer. And all that to be done automatically in the background. The solution was to get the client to specify 2 starting documents: define their asset register at the start of a project, and define a rule set that determined what type of asset got what type of checklist. We were then able to build 2 pre and post automations from it. The pre-automations were to take that Excel file, which is the asset register, and turn it into an asset register in the assets area in Forma by utilizing the register. The second thing was then to take their asset checklists, pull them out of Forma, and assign individual instances of checklists across all the forms. Once that was completed, we were then able to then create files and folders areas in the file data management area that when those assets forms were completed, it would auto collect them and drop them into the relevant asset folder and files. What that meant as an impact to this business was at the start of every project, it was taking at least 2 weeks for 2 people to do this manually. So to build the asset register, to go into each asset, click on the new form button and apply a new form for 7 or 8 forms on thousands of assets. The challenge with that is human error and inconsistency. The output of it is that we were able to automate that. So for every project they ran it on, they were already saving 50 hours on project initiation. The last part was building test packs out of it. So we were able to collate all the completed forms, getting a provided cover page from the client, and a content page would be auto-generated, and it would build out a report at the end for each asset with all the forms, all the documents, all the technical information for each asset built into one report. And that was saving 30 minutes of manual labor per report per asset. So overall, in the projects that they rolled this out on, in the first year, they saved 3,000 user hours on these projects. So these are just examples of automation and why it's important. But there's a couple of things I want you to take away from this. Optimization isn't just one big change. It's a series of interconnected smaller changes that allow efficiency and standardization of your business. Most investment automation is normally returned back to you in factors of 10x, depending on the impact and the capability of the automation. Focus on the most important things. Removal of repetitive tasks, removal of human error will allow your teams to focus on the things that are really important that impact your bottom line. But it's also reflective of the industry that we're in. So I'll close on this. We're all using different systems, but we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to track and manage the same outcomes. And all of those outcomes relate back to one thing: success. So
Wow.
I'll hand it back. Thank you very
much. What more can be added? I think this is a great statement. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Dave. A lot of insights in what's possible behind or beyond working with Autodesk Forma and the complete ecosystem. So I think if people are inspired currently, by your two stories what's more possible. If you have any questions, please reach out to your local representative from NTI who can connect you to Dave, Kenneth, or anyone else. We have this knowledge. We can help you with this, well, like Dave ended, with the challenges we have currently. So thank you guys, but up to the next and the last version or the last session of today. He's been here in the background all day answering your questions whenever it's possible. But yeah, now he's up to the stage, into the light. It's Chris van der Fluit. He's my main colleague here in the Netherlands. He can take you up to the new features, or at least the latest features for the last couple of months within Autodesk Forma. Chris, take it away.